Thank you Typhur for sponsoring this video.
This is the official One Piece cookbook, which has a recipe for the most iconic thing in the One Piece universe, Luffy's meat on bone. Close seconds are Panda Man and that chopstick nose thing. Well, the book is not cooking at all when it comes to this recipe because this looks absolutely nothing like the meat on bone in One Piece.
Sanji's recipe looks like a giant chicken nugget, when the one in the anime is clearly red meat. And why the heck is there an egg in it? This has to be the biggest bamboozle since Aaron Franklin's first cookbook, allegedly.
Well, I'm gonna show you how to make an authentic and super simple Luffy's meat on bone recipe. And I'll show you 2 ways to do it with beef plate ribs.
So the first version I'm going to be making does take a little bit of work, but no worries because I'm gonna go step by step through the entire process so you don't get lost. And the first thing we need to do is to take off this top fat right here. We wanna make sure that all of the meat is exposed and there's no fat covering it because we wanna ensure that the rub sticks to the meat. And as you're cutting, make sure that the knife is kind of angled upward and not downward because we want to preserve as much meat as possible. You see, I was able to get through and cut off this whole slab. There is a little bit of meat on it, but not a whole ton. And that's good enough there. There's certain parts on the beef rib that have fat that pretty much goes straight down to the bone. And if you look at the profile of the rib, you can kind of see where those spots are. So don't get too crazy with this because it's going to be impossible with some of those spots, like right here. Okay, the next thing we have to do is we're going to cut off all of the meat off of this bone. So we're gonna try to do it in one clean swoop so that we're left with just one big block of meat. So now we're left with bones and meat. So you're gonna wanna take one of these bones and clean it off because this is basically the centerpiece of this recipe. This is the bone in the meat on bone. So we wanna make sure it's as clean as possible. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and cut this slab. So I want this to be about 5 inches long because once it's done cooking, I wanna be able to see the bone at the top and the bone at the bottom so it can look just like Luffy's in the anime. And you can absolutely save these trims, and I highly recommend that you do because you can make some sausage and some excellent smash burgers with plate rib meat. And this slab is the perfect size for this bone because as this thing cooks, it's going to shrink drastically and we're gonna get a lot of pullback on both sides of the bone and it's gonna look really good, really authentic. So the next thing we need to do is to butterfly this slab. So if you used chuck ribs instead of plate ribs like I did, then you're gonna have 4 bones, meaning that your slab is gonna be a lot longer and you may not have to butterfly. But with the plate ribs, it's just not enough real estate to get a good roll around this rib bone. So we're gonna go ahead and butterfly it. And there we go. Look at that beautiful marbling. Wow. I love beef ribs. All right, so now it's time to assemble. We're just gonna take our bone, make sure it's right in the middle, and then just like you would guess, you're gonna roll it up into this slab. You wanna make sure it's pretty tight. And now to secure it, we're just gonna get a piece of butcher's twine and tie it up in a couple of spots. So now that we have our raw meat on bone assembled, we need to get some seasoning on it. Now, I'm using this Zavala's barbecue rub that I got on my last trip when I went to Texas. But you can use whatever you'd like. You can even just use salt and pepper, but whatever you do use, I recommend using something salty to help cut the fatty richness of the beef rib once it's done. And we just want a nice coat on the entire rib.
Don't forget the edges.
Okay, so quite a bit of steps for the first version, but definitely worth it. Because once it's done, it's gonna look so close to the one in the anime. Trust me. And for those of you who are thinking, there is no way I'm doing all that work, there is a super simple version that I'm gonna show you right now. Just take a rack of beef plate ribs, trim the top fat, and cut off the end bones. When we're cutting it, we wanna make sure that we're cutting as close as possible to the bone so that we can have as much meat as possible in this center cut that's going to be our meat on bone. But by no means do not throw the side ribs away either. Cook them alongside the center rib and you're gonna have 2 extra ribs that still have plenty of meat. Then we'll season with the exact same rub from the first rib. And that's all we need to do for the second rib. And there's no need to use any butcher's twine on the rib because the membrane's still on the back of the rib, so it's gonna hold it together throughout the entire cook. And at the end of the cook, we'll still be able to pick it up, hold it, and take a big bite out of it, just like Luffy. And I'm gonna be cooking one rib indoors and another rib outdoors to give y'all an oven recipe that anybody with a kitchen can do, but then also having a barbecue version of this recipe because let me tell you guys, for those who have not had beef ribs before, smoke and beef ribs is an incredible combination. It is the best way to eat a beef rib. And thankfully for me, to help me stay on top of both of these cooks, I have my Instaprobe from Typhur, sponsor of today's video. Over the last 6 months, I've used this Typhur Instaprobe and I've taken it with me on all my trips. So when I went to Goldie's in Texas, or when I visited Mad Scientist Barbecue in Kentucky, and most recently when I went to California to try the best barbecue in the state, this Typhur Instaprobe was with me, and I can safely say after the countless amount of times that I had to use it, that I love the Typhur Instaprobe. This thing came in clutch to get the temperature on any piece of meat that I wanted, no matter how deep it was in the massive bits we were using. And because this thermometer is the fastest on the market with a 0.75 second response time, I didn't have to hold myself in an awkward position for a long period of time, potentially burning my arms and dropping arm sweat on the meat. And the Instaprobe was great at night because of the backlit OLED display, which made it super easy to read in the dark, but also because of the nice clear bold font that the Instaprobe uses. Seriously, I get a lot of thermometers sent to me, but the Typhur Instaprobe stands out among all of the other ones I've tried. So make sure to check out the Typhur Instaprobe with the link in the description box. Thank you, Typhur.
So for the rolled rib, I put in a wire rack over a foil tray to catch the drippings, and then I put it in the oven at 260 degrees Fahrenheit. After a few hours, the crust is set, and I can feel with my Typhur Instaprobe that the collagen has broken down. At this point, it's ready for sauce. And we're looking for the temperature to be around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So put on a nice coat of Bachan's barbecue sauce, or you can use your favorite brand here. Once coated, put it back in the oven to cook for 15 more minutes, let the sauce set, and it's done. For the other rib, I put it in my Camp Chef Woodwind Pro at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours.
And I'm going 2 hours at low temperatures for the beginning of this cook because, again, we're using a pellet grill. And if you cook really hot with a pellet grill at like 275, the meat's just gonna cook super fast and we're not gonna get a lot of smoked flavor onto these ribs. So by going low, we're gonna make sure that we get that nice smokiness on the rib once it's done at the end. Also, I'm not just smoking that center rib, I also put the side ribs inside of the cooker as well. So as we go on in this cook, you're gonna see 3 bones in the pellet smoker, so just so you're not confused, you know why now.
Once the 3 hours were up, the internal temperature was in the mid to low 100s, and it's already getting some really nice color, but it's not even close to being done. So I increased the temperature of the smoker to 275 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm gonna cook it at this temperature until it's done. And we'll know it's done when it's temping around 200 degrees Fahrenheit to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And the probe goes into the beef rib like butter. Very little resistance. So pull the beef rib off the grill and wrap it in foil and rest until it gets down to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it's time to try our homemade Luffy's meat on bone.
So I have smoked beef ribs many times, so I already knew what the smoked beef rib was gonna look like, but this oven beef rib looks insane. Not only does it look more like Luffy's meat on bone compared to the smoked one, but the crust is almost just as dark as the smoked one. And I think it's because that Zavala's rub has some sugar in it, and I think that sugar just browned and gave the rib an incredible crust. So with that said, you can do either one of these recipes in your kitchen oven if you don't have a smoker, and you can get an insane crust, as you can see here. And with all that covered, let's go ahead and taste both of these bones to see which one is the best. Okay, you guys are not gonna believe this, but the oven meat on bone is like way better. This thing is insanely juicy, and that Bachan's barbecue sauce pairs so nicely with the meat. In the oven, this is so freaking good. Make sure to watch the next video on your screen where I made another barbecue recipe that also works well in the oven. The all new menu item at Goldie's, the #1 barbecue in Texas. And I'll see you guys over there.